the medieval era, spanning from the fall of the Roman Empire in the 5th century to the dawn of the Renaissance in the 15th century, was a time of profound transformations in European history. Society was stratified into rigid hierarchies with the nobility and the clergy at the top, and the vast majority of people, the peasants, toiling in the fields. This division permeated every aspect of medieval life, including their diet. What the powerful put on their plates was worlds apart from what the common folk could afford. The stark contrast in their meals not only reflects the vast inequality of the time, but also offers a glimpse into the realities of survival, aspiration, and the struggle for sustenance that defined medieval existence. In the grand halls of medieval castles and manor houses, the nobility and the clergy indulged in a diet that was a feast for the senses. Their tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, fresh fish, and an array of dishes seasoned with exotic spices that hinted at distant lands. These culinary delights were a far cry from the meager meals of the peasants. Let's explore the world of the upper classes and their sumptuous feasts. For the medieval elite, meals were not just about nourishment, they were a display of wealth and power. Feasts were lavish affairs, not just for special occasions, but for everyday life. Meats such as beef, pork, lamb, and venison were staples of their diet. Exotic imports like cinnamon, nutmeg, and ginger transformed simple dishes into gourmet experiences. These spices not only added unique flavors, but also served as symbols of the host's connection to distant trade networks. Fruits and vegetables from local gardens and orchards supplemented their meals, ensuring a variety of flavors that were the envy of the peasants. The centerpiece of many medieval feasts was meat, often served as a symbol of the host's prosperity and dominance. Roasts were popular, as were dishes like swan, peacock, and venison. Venison, the meat of deer hunted in the forests, was particularly prized. The acquisition of meat was not just about hunting or raising livestock, it was a demonstration of authority. Hunting rights were often restricted to the nobility, and poaching was a serious crime punishable by severe fines or even imprisonment. In a time when meat was scarce for most, the upper classes enjoyed a variety of fish, both freshwater and saltwater. Carp, trout, pike, and eels were popular choices. For those near the coast, seafood like lobster, crab, and oysters added a touch of luxury to their meals. The abundance of fish in medieval noble diets is evident in recipes and accounts of feasts. Whole roasted salmon, stuffed with spices and herbs, were common centerpieces. Medieval feasts were not just about the food, they were spectacles of wealth and power. The presentation and abundance of dishes showcased the host's status and created an atmosphere of opulence that was designed to impress guests. Food, for the elite, was more than sustenance. It was a tool to assert their dominance, a reward for their elevated status, and a means to build alliances and project power. In stark contrast to the opulent feasts enjoyed by the nobility, the medieval peasants lived a life of agricultural labor and modest sustenance. Their meals consisted of simple, filling, and often monotonous fare that provided the energy they needed to work the fields day in and day out. The typical peasant diet was primarily vegetarian, consisting of grains like wheat, rye, and barley, legumes such as peas and beans, and vegetables like onions, leeks, and cabbage. These foods were grown locally and were chosen not for their variety or taste, but for their ability to sustain life. Their meals were often referred to as thin porridge, dark, dense bread, and small pieces of tough, stringy meat. These dishes may seem unappetizing to modern standards, but they were the result of necessity, not choice. The peasant diet lacked the richness of the elite, and they rarely had access to fresh fruit, exotic spices, or imported delicacies. Instead, they relied on local, seasonal, and affordable ingredients. They occasionally supplemented their meals with small game or fish, if they lived near water. However, hunting was restricted, and most fish consumed by peasants was preserved by salting, smoking, or drying. Even then, fish was considered a luxury, and they mostly subsisted on bread, vegetables, and whatever scraps of meat they could obtain. The average peasant family worked a small plot of land, typically less than 2 acres. They grew a variety of grains, legumes, and vegetables that formed the basis of their diet. The amount of food they could consume depended on the weather, the success of the harvest, and the demands of their lord. There were times of plenty and times of scarcity, and they had to be prepared for both. During the medieval period, festivals and religious holidays offered temporary respites from the hardships of everyday life. These celebrations often included communal meals that allowed peasants to enjoy a bit more variety in their diet. For instance, during Christmas feasts, they might have the opportunity to partake in dishes like roasted boar or spiced wine, treats that were normally reserved for the upper classes. Such moments of indulgence, however, were fleeting, and the peasants' lives were largely defined by their arduous labor and the constant struggle for survival. Food was not just sustenance, it was a marker of one's place in society. For peasants, food was about necessity, not luxury. Their meals were a reflection of their status, providing the bare minimum to keep them alive and working the land. In a time of great divides, their food choices were limited, their access to resources was restricted, and their meals were simple and repetitive. Yet, within these limitations, they found ways to supplement their diets, to celebrate occasions with simple joys, and to endure the hardships of a world where food security was never guaranteed. It's important to note that medieval life wasn't static. Over the centuries, there were shifts in the balance of power, in agricultural practices, and in the availability of resources. For example, after the Black Death, the labor shortages led to better access to food for some peasants. However, these changes were not universal, and the general trend of the medieval era was one of stark inequality. Now let's delve deeper into the role of women in the medieval diet. Women's roles were multifaceted. They managed households, cultivated crops, preserved food, and cooked meals. They gathered wild edibles, raised livestock, and sometimes owned property. Their knowledge of herbs and traditional remedies was invaluable. Despite societal constraints, women's roles in food production and preparation were crucial to the survival of their families. They made decisions about what to grow, how to prepare meals, and how to use resources efficiently. Women's roles in food-related tasks varied depending on their social class. For noble women, there were professional cooks who prepared meals. But noble women themselves may have overseen the kitchen and set menus for special events. But peasant women had the most intimate relationship with food, as they were responsible for growing, preparing, and serving meals for their families. Their knowledge was essential for survival, and they often held significant power within their households. To truly understand medieval food, we must consider the intricate roles that women played in every aspect of the culinary experience. Their skills, knowledge, and labor were the backbone of medieval diets, ensuring that families had the nourishment they needed to survive and thrive. Medieval recipes are a fascinating window into the culinary practices and resourcefulness of the time. These recipes, often handwritten or passed down orally, offer insights into the ingredients, techniques, and cultural influences that shaped medieval cooking. They highlight the creativity and adaptability of medieval cooks, who made the best of available ingredients and developed innovative dishes. These recipes reveal the importance of seasonality and locality. Medieval cooks relied on what was fresh and accessible in their region, leading to diverse culinary traditions across different parts of Europe. They incorporated local specialties and adapted recipes based on what was in season. This resulted in a wide variety of dishes, each reflecting the unique geography and climate of its origin. Medieval recipes often blended practicality with creativity. Cooks had to make the most of limited ingredients and leftovers, and they did so with ingenuity. They used every part of an animal, crafted sauces to elevate simple dishes, and preserved food for times of scarcity. Their resourcefulness is evident in recipes that combined inexpensive ingredients, such as using ground acorns or sawdust to stretch flour in bread making. The medieval culinary repertoire was influenced by various cultures. As trade routes expanded, new ingredients and cooking methods reached medieval kitchens. For example, the introduction of spices from Asia transformed the way dishes were seasoned, adding new dimensions of flavor. Let's look at some examples. One famous medieval recipe is for roast swan with spices. This elaborate dish, fit for a royal feast, involves stuffing a swan with a mixture of spices such as ginger,